शृणुयाम देवाः भद्रं पश्येमाक्षभिर्यजत्राः स्थिरैरङ्गैस्तुष्टुवागुंसस्तनूभिः व्यशेम देवहितं यदायुः स्वस्ति न इन्द्रो वृद्धश्रवाः स्वस्ति नः पूषा विश्ववेदाः स्वस्ति नस्तार्क्ष्यो अरिष्टनेमिः स्वस्ति नो बृहस्पतिर्दधातु ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। अथाश्वलायनो भगवन्तं परमेष्ठिनमुपसमेत्योवाच अधीहि भगवन् ब्रह्मविद्यां वरिष्ठां सदा सद्भिः सेव्यमानां निगूढाम् यया चिरात् सर्वपापं व्यपोह्य परात् परं पुरुषं याति विद्वान् तस्मै स होवाच पितामहश्च श्रद्धा भक्तिध्यानयोगादवैः न कर्मणा न प्रजया धनेन त्यागेनैके अमृतत्वमानशुः परेण नाकं निहितं गुहायां विभ्राजते यद्यतयो विशन्ति वेदान्तविज्ञानसुनिश्चितार्थाः सन्न्यासयोगाद्यतयः शुद्धसत्त्वाः ते ब्रह्मलोकेषु परान्तकाले परामृतात् परिमुच्यन्ति सर्वे विविक्तदेशे च सुखासनस्थः शुचिः समग्रीव शिरः शरीरः अत्याश्रमस्थः सकलेन्द्रियाणि निरुध्य भक्त्या स्वगुरुं प्रणम्य हृत्पुण्डरीकं विरजं विशुद्धं विचिन्त्य मध्ये विशदं विशोकम् अचिन्त्यमव्यक्तमनन्तरूपं शिवं प्रशान्तममृतं ब्रह्मयोनिम् तथादिमध्यान्तविहीनमेकं विभुं चिदानन्दमरूपमद्भुतम् उमासहायं परमेश्वरं प्रभुं त्रिलोचनं नीलकण्ठं प्रशान्तम् ध्यात्वा मुनिर्गच्छति भूतयोनिं समस्तसाक्षिं तमसः परस्तात् स ब्रह्मा स शिवस्येन्द्रः सोऽक्षरः परमस्वराट् स एव विष्णुः स प्राणः स कालोऽग्निः स चन्द्रमाः स एव सर्वं यद्भूतं यच्च भव्यं सनातनम् ज्ञात्वा तं मृत्युमत्येति नान्यः पन्था विमुक्तये सर्वभूतस्थमात्मानं सर्वभूतानि चात्मनि सम्पश्यन् ब्रह्म परमं याति नान्येन हेतुना।
In Kaivalya Upanishad, Lord Brahma is the Guru and Ashwalayana is the disciple. It is very relevant that we invoke the blessings of Goddess Saraswati in this context because tomorrow is Saraswati Puja. In Hinduism, all the important key portfolios are in the hands of Goddess. Wealth is Goddess Lakshmi is the in charge of wealth. Power is in hands of, you can say, Defense Ministry, Finance Ministry or HRD Ministry. All these three are very important ministries. All these three are handled by great goddesses. From Vedantic point of view, we know that it is all in the form of a power and every power is feminine in nature. Maya is the Shakti or power of Ishvara. Maya is feminine in its form. The power and the person wielding the power, they are not separate from each other. This is a very important concept as it is, you have to remember always, because it is very clear in other religions that God is masculine. It is their belief, God is masculine only. But in Hinduism, the pure Brahman is beyond it all. That is the Supreme Self. You can call it Satchitananda, you can call it consciousness, by whatever name you want to call it. It cannot be captured in any thought. It is beyond all pairs of opposites. It's beyond man and woman. It is beyond everything that you can conceive of. It doesn't fit into any name, any form, any concept. But the same thing can be understood with form also. And that is always in terms of the combination of Purusha and Prakriti, Ishvara and Maya. It is that Vedantic concept which is in the Saguna form for easier worshipping is understood as Shiva and Shakti, Vishnu, Lakshmi, Brahma, Saraswati, etc. They are inseparable. They are absolutely inseparable. And this has to be first deeply ingrained in our system. And it is very interesting that the concept of Brahma, Vishnu, Maheshwara, because in this Upanishad later he is going to talk about Saguna Brahman and meditation in terms of understanding the Supreme Brahman as Lord Shiva. That's how this Upanishad explains. And for always invoking the Lord, we need a sort of a recommendation, a easy way to get through. So we see that the inseparable concepts of creation, destruction and maintenance is integral part of the universe. The word in destruction we use in English, but it is not actually destruction. The word is dissolution, you can say, is closer word. Dissolution. Laya is the word that is used. It is not a something that is destroyed and it is not there. It is just going into unmanifest form. Creation is something coming up from the unmanifest form. So these three concepts are inseparable, and this is what as a tattva runs this universe. Since we cannot probably conceive this, they put three deities in charge of these three departments, as it were. It is one Brahma only. Later, as we chanted the Kaivalya Upanishad, we saw that there is a beautiful mantra which comes Sa Brahma, Sa Shiva, Sa Hari, Sendra, Sa Akshara. What? See, he is everything. He is Brahma, he is Vishnu, he is Maheshwara. Who is he? He is he. A father at home, when he puts on the coat and goes to the office, he is an officer. When he puts on a t-shirt and goes to golf course, he is a golfer. When he puts on a dhoti and goes to temple, he is a bhakta or something. They are not three different personalities. It is the same personality. He is putting three different forms in three different roles that he plays. So like that, it is the same tattva of Supreme Self, which is in the form of Brahma understood as creator, in the form of Vishnu understood as one who sustains or maintains, and in the form of Shiva, one who is the dissolver or destroyer. All these three gods are paired with goddesses, and that is also very logical. So Brahma, being the lord of creation, his consort is Saraswati, because Saraswati is the goddess of knowledge. Without knowledge there is no creation. So this is a tattva that go together. So Brahma and Saraswati cannot be separated. Any form of maintenance in this world is not possible without wealth. So maintenance and wealth go together. Even an ashram which talks about the, let us say, the ill effects of misuse of wealth also needs wealth to run. So wealth is inseparable as far as the maintenance aspect is concerned. Every aspect of this world. There is a great Tirukural says, Purulillar kivvulagam illai. That means Arulillar kavvulagam illai. Avvulagam means that world. That world means that is a transcendental word. Arul means grace. If you don't have grace, you don't have that world. Porul means material wealth. Ivulagamale. This world is not there. This world is not there for one who doesn't have wealth. That world is not there for one who doesn't have grace. Very simply put it is. Again, any form of dissolution or destruction needs Shakti or power. So Shiva and Shakti are combined together. Now Saraswati as a concept is worshipped in the Navaratri in South India, but in Bengal she has a very separate worship. But the order is the same. First we worship Durga. Here also, first we worship Durga, then Lakshmi, then Kali, then comes Saraswati. With a little gap it comes. That's about all. But the order is the same. So in the Navaratri, the order is that first you destroy all your negativities. That is the worship of Durga. Then you inculcate positive wealth. Wealth is not just the wealth of money. It is the wealth of qualities. That wealth of qualities is imbibed through worship of Lakshmi. Anything auspicious is Lakshmi. And then once you are prepared like this, you are ready for the knowledge of the self, which is Saraswati. So Saraswati is the goddess of all learning, but Saraswati has to be invoked for the learning of the self-knowledge also. So that is what we are doing here. When we are studying Gita or Upanishads, we are not doing it for an intellectual understanding of what the self is all about. It is a journey towards the truth. We are trying to open up our consciousness towards that ultimate reality, for which grace of Saraswati is important. And like every god or goddess, form of Saraswati is also very beautiful in its symbolism. Saraswati is white in color. She is clothed also in white sari always. White represents the ultimate purity. In this verse that we are doing, there is a term that comes as Shuddha Sattva. Sattva itself is purity. Shuddha Sattva is very pure. So the whiteness makes us understand that as you gain the knowledge more and more, and your thoughts become transparent as it were, it is represented by white. White is something which is always associated with purity. That is why even in various religions you have this white cloth as a uniform that is associated with religion or spirituality. Jain monks also wear that. Priests wear in the church. And even generally there is a white thing associated with many people. Swami Ramtirtha gives the explanation that why everybody likes white. Why is white considered as a pure thing? Vis-a-vis black. It has nothing to do with anybody's skin color or anything like that. It is to do with the color of the mind, if you want to call it. Why is it that a ill-gotten wealth is called as black money? Anything that is sold outside the market with a higher MRP is called as a black market. Why is black always associated with something impure, something corrupt? White is associated with something very pure. Because white functions on the phenomenon of giving. This is what Swami Ramtirtha says. White is when you have a disc of 7 colors, Vibgyorik colors. When you rotate it fast against the light, what comes out is a white color. So, why does any object appear that color? The phenomenon of colors in physics says that an object appears in a particular color because it gives away that color. If an object appears green, it absorbs all other colors and gives away green. What it reflects, it has. If it reflects blue alone, it has blue. If it reflects a combination of certain things, that combination alone it has. Like that it is. What happens if it reflects away everything? It appears white. What happens if it absorbs everything? That is black. This is the phenomenon of colors. So if you are able to translate this with reference to a attitude of a person, mind of a person who always absorbs everything, withholds everything, takes everything, and there is no attitude of giving, he is considered black in the mental wise, in the mental state. Similarly, a person who is always giving away everything is pure person. He is considered a white in terms of his color of the mind. So this is represented in Saraswati, that the knowledge that we undertake, that we gain, must make our mind more and more pure. She is also having in this sloka Yakuntendu Dusharahara Tavla, it says she is having the flower Kunda. That is also white in color. Everything associated with Saraswati is such purity only. She has, like all gods and goddesses, four arms, where she holds Vedas in one hand, she holds Veena in two hands and plays Veena, and she has a Rudrakshamala in the fourth hand. This again shows not just the picture of perfection but also the path to perfection. The path to perfection in terms of introversion is combination of bhakti and jnana. One cannot be done without the other. Playing of Veena represents bhakti. The form of an art which is associated with heart is bhakti. Study of Vedas is jnanam. When these two are done together, you go into the state of meditation. Then this Shraddha, Bhakti, Dhyana, that's what it comes. It is through meditation that you realize the self. And interestingly, the vehicle that Saraswati has is swan, Hamsa. This Hamsa is said to be a very, again, it's very pure and white in color, and it is said to have a very great quality. The quality of swan is that it can, when you mix water and milk, it can separate the water and drink the milk. This is its quality. That is why in Ramakrishna Mission also, I think the symbol is swan. What does it mean? It represents the water and milk cannot be segregated. How it can be segregated? It is just not possible. But imagine if somebody has to segregate it, what type of a discrimination it should have. The discrimination as though between reality and unreality. That is the ultimate discrimination or viveka. So the swan is associated. You see, all this is also very scientifically done. For Parvati, what is the vehicle? Lion it is. Isn't it? For Shakti, it is lion. For Saraswati, it is swan. It is very beautifully associated. For Shiva, it is Shivaratri is coming. Think about it. Shiva has Nandi. It is all again beautifully connected that way also. All this apart, of course, Saraswati's blessing is always required, and that is why right from a young age, children have to be invoked with shlokas of Saraswati, and they have to do it to get into more absorption of knowledge. But an interesting phenomenon about Saraswati, which is can be understood probably only in this country, because Saraswati worship is beyond the territory of India also. She is worshipped in Japan. She has a name. You can Google it out. I think Byzantine. Huh? Byzantine or something, I think is the name. We don't know the exact pronunciation because it's given in English. But all the South Asian countries which are influenced by Hinduism up to Japan, there is worship of Saraswati in everywhere. But interestingly, even though feminine worship is prevalent all over India, Shakti Pitas are more than even Jyotirlinga and other kshetras. You have worship of Shakti from Baluchistan to Dhaka and from Kashmir to Sri Lanka and everywhere is in the form of Shakti Pita. I am saying you will hardly find temples dedicated for Saraswati. There are there, but very few. Compared to Lakshmi, compared to Parvati, the worship of Saraswati is very, very less in terms of dedicated temples. There are sannidhis in big temples that are there. Similarly, dedicated temples for Lord Brahma is even rare. There is one in Pushkar, maybe there is one somewhere else. One or two like that only it is. There is a philosophical meaning also to it. But there is no explanation why Saraswati should not have temple, though there are stories for Lord Brahma, etc. The only reason that can be given is that this shows the sort of what you call as a pativrata dharma of a woman. When the husband doesn't have a temple as it is, she also doesn't have. This cannot be explained in a feminist type of audience or something like that. It's just not possible. That's why we said first these two are inseparable. That has to be first always remember. Only if we have a separation that Brahma is different and Saraswati is different, we'll have all this problem. It is not so. Brahma and Saraswati are one and the same. Saraswati will not go where order of Brahma is not there. It is beautifully said in Ramayana like that. In Ramayana, the story of Ramayana is going to be narrated by Lord Brahma. First, Narada comes to Valmiki. Then Saraswati comes in the form of a shloka. Then Lord Brahma comes. So it's a figuratively saying, how come Saraswati came into me? I thought, without my permission, how she will come? She has my permission to come only, he says. So Brahma and Saraswati, and Brahma narrates the story of Ramayana to Valmiki, and that's how it comes. So these tattva has to be understood at the tattva level. Devotion has to be understood at the level with which the form is associated. Only when the combination of this is there, there can be a true spiritual evolution. So Bhakti and Jnana has to go hand in hand. So Saraswati Puja must be undertaken with this idea to invoke her blessings for us to gain more knowledge of the self. All other knowledges which are also important for the world is through her grace only. Since we are dedicating ourselves to study of Gita and Upanishads, it is also through her grace. So that is what Saraswati Puja is meant for. Right. Mantra 3 talks about that which is higher than heaven. Parena Nakam. Kam represents joy. Akam represents sorrow. Nakam represents a realm of no sorrow, which is heaven. Parena Nakam shows that it is something beyond all realms of heaven, which is representing the self. And where is that? It is Nihitam Guhayam. It is there within the cave heart of your own personality. But the cave gives a picture as though it is gloomy. It is not so. It says Vibhrajate, that which is resplendent, that which is shining. Yet Yatayaha Vishanti, those ascetics who put in effort, who are constantly putting in effort, they enter the state of self-realization. Now, how do they enter is what is given in the next line. Vedanta Vijnana Sunishchitataha Sannyasa Yogat Yatayaha Shuddha Sattvaha. The term Sannyasa Yoga is given here. It is referring to the yoga of renunciation. 18th chapter recently that was concluded is Moksha Sannyasa Yoga. It is through renunciation, the yoga practiced by a sannyasi is the direct meaning. But there is also pun on the word Sannyasa Yoga. Yoga generally refers to union. Sannyasa generally refers to renunciation, which is removing. Another thing is joining. So, removing and joining is the combination of Sannyasa Yoga. So, it's a very interesting thought that you cannot remove yourself from the lower rung of any growth unless otherwise you have established in the higher rung of that same growth. In a ladder, you cannot remove the leg from the third step if you have not established in the fourth step. So of these two also think about what comes first. It is the establishment in the first. If you cannot say that I will first remove myself from the third and then jump to fourth, it is not possible. Slowly you have to establish yourself in the fourth and then only the third is automatically removed. It's a cycle then, cycle of growth. Like that, unless a person is established in certain higher values in the path towards the self, he cannot extricate himself from the lower attachments. This is a natural law. Now, in terms of spiritual evolution, unless otherwise a person gets into Vedantic wisdom, this cycle is not possible. In the worldly example, we say that when a child gets into a bicycle level, it leaves the toys, correct? When a person gets then into a storybook level, he may leave the bicycle. When he gets into a motorbike and friends, he may leave the storybooks. This is a natural phenomenon that we see as the stage in life progresses. But this cannot be taken directly as a spiritual evolution. This is an example to, because just take it to the extreme that a person dies and then he is born again as a human. He may still play with toys. So it is not that he has risen over the toys in terms of knowledge. It is the stage of growth in a person's life in this lifetime, like that. That is the example that is given. If you apply that same example here, when does a person at the mental level grow over his childhood? We are all at the level of spiritual children level. That is why the Shastras or the Rishis address us as Balaha. Balaha means children. Sankhya Yoga Prutak Balaha. A person who thinks Sankhya and Yoga are different, he is a spiritual child. He is a child. So that is how Rishis see us. That is how the Shastras see us. So this person who is at a child at that level, he cannot raise himself to the level of an adult unless otherwise he deeply thinks and gets established himself in Vedantic wisdom. So the study of Vedanta is to elevate our thought flow and raise our level of consciousness. Vedanta Vijnana Sunishchitartaha. Nishchitartaha means very certain. Sunishchitartaha means very, very certain. Absolutely certain. Those who are absolutely certain in Vedantic wisdom, this is a intellectual certainty is only a step in the process. Remember this. Intellectually, we may be very clear in concepts and you do get established. That is a very important step also. But only based on intellectual standing alone, that establishment doesn't come. Because if a superior intellect with a superior argument, with a superior point of view, he will be able to easily topple you if he is able to put forward his point of view and you don't have any counter argument for it. See, that is why the establishment is not merely at the intellectual level. A person who is studying Gita with his heart and soul into it, let us say completely, he believes in Krishna's words as it is, and he believes Krishna as it is given in the Gita as Avatara of the Supreme Lord himself, where all the statements refer to like that only. And there are enough evidences also to show that Krishna was a great personality who lived about 5,000 years ago. If you merely approach Gita from that point of view, and you are talking about certain words that are given by Krishna, and you understand it at that level alone, a person who has a different data or a superior this thing, he may come and disprove the existence of Krishna itself. Then probably your faith in the words that are given in the words of Krishna in Bhagavad Gita also may be shaken if you are only approaching it that way. But if a person has merged into the concepts that are given there in terms of what the Supreme Self is, and with devotion he is able to feel it, even though he might not be able to explain the concepts fully, that person cannot be shaken. So what is establishment in Vedantic wisdom is heart and soul put together is into it completely. It is not merely understanding at the intellectual level only. So Vedanta Vijnana Sunishchita, in 7th chapter also the terms Jnana and Vijnana is given. Jnana is explained in terms of knowledge and Vijnana is in terms of wisdom. Wisdom when it is internalized. Once it is internalized completely, it becomes part of you. That person stands on a very rock solid ground. He cannot be shaken. So Vedanta Vijnana Sunishchitartaha, only by understanding the concepts, and Vedantic concepts are very scientific. That is why start with that level which is applicable to your intellect now and get a feel for it. Get an understanding for it at how it applies in your day-to-day life. Then you will have more and more Shraddha and faith in the other things. So those who have crossed those limits and who are having no doubt anymore as it is, they are completely established in Vedantic wisdom. Vedanta Vijnana Sunishchitartaha, by the yoga of sannyasa. Sannyasa yoga yatayaha, they are again a very dynamic and hard working people, ascetics who put in a lot of effort. Shuddha Sattvaha, they are of very, very, very pure minds. Absolutely, the mind is transparent. This is the translation of Shuddha Sattvaha. But there is a pun on the word Shuddha Sattva, if you want to take it. If you don't go by the extreme grammar of it and just take Shuddha Sattva as it is. We know that the three gunas, Sattva, Rajas and Tamas are there. Sattva is the pure guna. Other two are the gunas of impurity, Rajas and Tamas. But all three gunas have to coexist. And as far as the individual composition is concerned, all of us have all these three gunas. It is only the proportion that varies. Somebody may have sattva more and less of rajas tamas. So he is called as a sattvic person. He is sattvic because he is predominantly sattvic. A person is rajasic if he is predominantly rajasic. Similarly, a person who is predominantly tamasic is called a tamasic person. All of us have these three, and as long as we are individuals, these three have to coexist. The proportion may vary, but it has to be there. When a realization occurs, that state is called as guna atita. Guna atita means it is beyond the gunas. You have transcended the gunas. That time you just not transcend the tamas and rajas, you transcend the sattva also. So, in other words, all these three gunas are binding the individual to the world. If a chain is binding you in normal sense of the term and it is very hard on you, you cannot move here or there and it is hurting you, you can call it rajasic, iron chain. If the same chain is in that rajas, there is lot more rust. In that chain, lot more rust is there. And over and above it, very many sharp nails are there. And it is very dirt and everything is also there. And its effect is too much. But sort of you have got used to it. That sort of a state. That chain is tamas. But there is a chain that's very golden. It's not hurting you. It is very softly bound upon you. But it is still a chain. Gold is gold, but chain still. So all these three are chains that bind us. Self-realization is a state where you go beyond all these chains. At that time, what happens is that the tamas and rajas are annihilated. They go to zero. Whatever be the percentage of sattva, what it was, it becomes 99, then it becomes 99 and half, it becomes 99.99. It will still be there as sattva. But beyond that, it is not 100% sattva. That sattva transcends to self, as it were. So it is infinite. So rajas and tamas become zero. Sattva is also not there. In that sense, you can say it's zero, but it has transcended to infinite. So therefore, that person is beyond all gunas. So if you connect that yad yataiha vishanti and the shuddha sattva word, we can say that it is talking about a direct liberation here in this mantra. This is symbolized by what in Ramayana? These three gunas. The three brothers of Lanka represent these three gunas. Ravana represents rajas. Ravana has a force in everything. He has a passion in everything. He is a character which is completely a personification of rajas. Somebody says go and do tapas means immediately goes and go and bring Sita. He will run for that. He is a very passionate person, full of desires, full of anger. That type of a rajasic quality is seen in Ravana. Kumbhakarna is a personification of tamas. Again, we are not talking about, he had certain wisdom also. He also gave advice to Ravana in terms of like what Vibhishana said. But predominantly he is a tamasic person because we see that he is always sleeping, never awake, as it were. So Kumbhakarna represents tamas. Vibhishana represents sattva. Vibhishana is considered like a Alvar. Alvar is a divine person. In South India, he is referred to as Alvar only. Alvar is a devotee of God. He is part of God. Vibhishana always spoke the truth. He always spoke what is right. He was a person who was not affected by anything. All the sattvic qualities was very clearly visible in him. So at the time of destruction of Lanka under Ravana's regime, as it were, what happened was Ravana and Kumbhakarna were annihilated. So rajas and tamas goes away. What happens to one step before that? The sattva cannot sustain there by itself. So Vibhishana goes and surrenders to Rama. Rama is the supreme self. This is one way of looking at this symbolism. So Shuddha Sattva also can be interpreted as the pure self. And that pure self is where these people enter, one who has established himself in Vedantic wisdom. By the yoga of renunciation, they enter this Shuddha Sattva, and the same Yatayaha is given in the previous verse also. So those who put in that effort, those who are completely established in Vedantic wisdom, they enter into the state of self-realization. That which is higher than heaven, seated in the cave, shining resplendent, that the ascetics enter, those ascetics are well established in Vedantic wisdom to become pure sattva through yoga of renunciation. We'll chant mantra 4 twice.
ते ब्रह्मलोकेषु परान्तकाले परामृतात् परिमुच्यन्ति सर्वे ते ब्रह्मलोकेषु परान्तकाले परामृतात् परिमुच्यन्ति सर्वे.
All those in Brahmaloka, realm of Brahma, by the end of time, become totally liberated through supreme immortality. As I said in the previous class, in some editions or some way of reading Kaivalya Upanishad, this mantra along with the last line of the previous mantra is taken together, and as I said, it is a similar mantra coming up in Mundaka. Anybody found the difference, Kalpana?
You could not understand this difference, but I think the treatment of this this word sannyasa yoga, I think that is.
No, I'm not talking about treatment. I'm talking about a verbatim verse only, mantra.
Yeah, it's almost the same.
It's almost the same.
This one is Paramritatva and that is Paramritaha.
That is the
That is the
difference.
major difference.
That is the difference. That is the only difference. Paramritaha parimuchyanti sarve comes in the Mundaka. Here, Paramritat parimuchyanti sarve. Those who know Sanskrit, they know it is from. It's a very, that is why the interpretation is completely different, if you see. And Swamiji has followed the traditional interpretation only in Mundaka Upanishad, because as I said, the Dasha Upanishad has the Mundaka Upanishad, was one of the key Upanishads. This is not to belittle Kaivalya. It is that great masters like Shankaracharya and others, they have chosen the 10 Upanishads, of which Mundaka forms a part. Here the word is Paramritat Parimuchyanti Sarve. I also consulted a couple of other editions to see whether it is a mistake or whether it is like this. I saw it is like this. In Chinmaya Mission book I saw, in some other book also I saw. It is Paramritat Parimuchyanti Sarve here. And there, Vedanta Vijnana Sunishchitartaha, plural. Sannyasa Yoga Dyataya Shuddha Sattvaha, plural. Te Brahma Lokeshu Parantakale, Paramritaha, plural. Parimuchyanti Sarve. Like that it comes. I mean, you can say it's just a play of words and you can just overlook that also, but it has a significance if you see it deeply. Paramritat means from, Vanat. Vanat means from the forest. Ashramat, ashramam means from one ashrama you go to other ashrama. That is from Grihastha ashrama you go to Vanaprastha ashrama. Vanaprastha ashrama to Sannyasa ashrama. So ashramat, ashramam, gachet says a commandment. That means you have to go from one ashrama. When this, in Sanskrit grammar, when this it comes, that is the fourth declension. Okay. So like that he says Paramritat. Paramrita means, Amrita means immortality. Paramrita means supreme immortality. Paramritat means from supreme immortality you have to go somewhere. It is impossible to understand. It is here, so therefore, the interpretation is with reference to a important concept in Vedanta. This concept, you gulp it as a concept only now. Think about it deeply. Read through the commentary of 8th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, which talks about these three paths, etc. that is going to come. but it is purely a very intellectual concept that has to be understood. As far as we are concerned, what is the connection in our sadhana, we will say at the end, but understand these three as a concept. First of all, here two words are given, Brahmalokeshu. So he is talking about Brahmaloka and he is talking about Parantakala. Parantakala means end of time. Kala means time. Antakala means, Anta means end. End of time. Parantakala means, very end of time. It is the very end of time. In Hinduism, our ancestors and rishis have dealt with the concept of space and time in a very grand manner. It is very phenomenal and it's very inspiring actually. This is obviously, honestly, not to belittle any others, but this type of, even if you say it is an imagination, this just doesn't fit in any other scripture or any other school of thought or any other religion. There was a Christian priest, and very genuinely taking Bible as the basis, he established the creation of world to be in 4004 BC. He even gave a date, February 4th or something like that. Imagine that they have understood that the world has to be created only 6,000 years back. And every 10 years, the age of the world goes back by another 10 billion years, isn't it? Everybody thought there was one Big Bang theory, which was, I think, propounded in 80s or early 90s. And then they fixed a time. And they thought that was it. Every few years, the researchers go beyond and beyond, and it goes by billions and billions of years back. It's amazing and it's phenomenal. They are doing their own research and doing certain things. But have we found the beginning of the universe, or it is just not possible? That is very clear. But still, they are trying in various ways. There is a string theory. There are various other theories that are coming to establish. So there are two things that they are fascinated about always in the world as to the inquiry is, when did this all begin? In terms of time, they are not able to find out the very beginning of time. Another thing is, where did it all begin? Or when you try to find out the space and outer space and go to the very extreme, where does this actually end or begin? That is also very fascinating. That is why in the terrace, when you go and look at the sky and sphere, right from a child to old person, when he forgets himself, he is fascinated by the vastness of it all. And that led to great studies in the past also. Even our people made very great calculations, more precise calculations than the modern science. When I say modern science, science is science. It's nothing modern or traditional about it. But even when Newton's calculations about world calendar, etc., was wrong by 25%, with reference to the calendars that existed before Newton. This is the, you go to the YouTube and search for Tale of Two Calendars. Very interesting talk. Of course, it needs a lot of patience to listen. It's a 1 hour video. It's by an Indian mathematician. He is explaining the phenomenon of calendars. Tale of Two Calendars, the Gregorian calendar and the Indian calendar. And he goes on to explain how what we think as Indian calendar is just not a lunar calendar. It's a lunisolar calendar. And how it is different from the solar calendar as it is followed by the Gregorian way, etc. We have deviated, but that's a very interesting topic by itself. What I'm trying to say is, there has been always a fascination of space and time. This concept of space and time is always fascinated, and it is a totally different dimension altogether when you see the world of objects and things. Everything in this world, as you understand, which is the third phenomenon in terms of the chain of cause and effect, it is only complete when you bring the other two things, which is space and time. So time, space and causation are actually threefold fork which holds everything. They are the actual thing, tripod as it were, on which the universe stands. In the 11th chapter, Bhagavad Gita, I think verse 32, Swamiji's commentary, you go read, he makes one statement. He says that this universe is created by causation. It is existing in space and it is destroyed by time. Same concept of Brahma, Vishnu, Maheshwara. Because in that form, that universal form which is changing in that Vishwarupa Darshana, Brahma and all comes first, then the Chaturbhuja Vishnu comes, then Mahakala comes. All that is showing it is in the same form. So these three phenomena are coming, and that form speaks, Kalosmi, Loka Kshayakrit Pravruttaha. I am the great time, he says there. In that commentary, he says this. So these three again are inseparable concepts, time, space, and causation. But what we see is phenomenal world, and we take this world of objects as real in themselves and try to explain it in terms of cause and effect relationship. But then what we do unconsciously is we segregate time and space away from this. But it is not possible. Time, space, and causation are integral concepts. They are integral concepts to the causation. All these three are very integral concepts. That is why the space and causation are also indicated. You can read the symbolism in that way. Mahavishnu has conch or the Shankhu in one hand and chakra in the other hand. That Shankh, which is conch, which produces sound, is associated with space. That chakra, which is revolving, is associated with time. It is a Kala chakra. It revolves always. It's a sword disc. The concept of space and time shown by Lord Shiva is, on one hand he has the Trishul, which shows the three periods of time. Other hand he has the Dumru, which is again a phenomenon of sound associated with space. So this space and time concept is again shown, as it were, in the control of the Supreme only. But as far as we are concerned, we are under the control of time, space, causation phenomenon totally. This time, space, and causation phenomenon, this space and time phenomenon, is left to our imagination. As much as you can imagine, it is there, and it is beyond there. So one theory that we have is that which is imagined probably has a limitation than the reality. See, we are given a calculation of time in Hinduism and Puranas, and even that comes from the Vedas and other things only. We have a calculation that is given with reference to distances, space, etc. in Puranas and in our Hindu scriptures. Both these actually blow our mind away. You imagine the ultimate of space, you imagine the ultimate of time, it is just not imaginable. See, in terms of time, what it is given? What is given is that you have the Kali Yuga now going on. Kali Yuga is hardly 5,000 years old. We are talking about the end of Kali Yuga, and all know what corruption, and Kali has gone overboard. Kali has not gone overboard. Kali has just started only. Kali has just started because Kali Yuga is said to last for 432,000 years. Where is 432,000? Where is 5,000? Long way to go. We are living in a glorious period now, actually. We are in a phenomenal period. This is Kali Yuga's beginning. 432,000 years is just Kali Yuga. Twice that Kali Yuga is called as Treta Yuga. Dwapara Yuga. Dwapara Yuga is 864,000 years. Dwapara Yuga is sometime where Mahabharata is said to have happened. At the end of Dwapara Yuga is where Kali comes. All the calculations are given in certain Puranas. What is the 3012 BC, etc. That again you can find out. And 3 times Kali Yuga is Treta Yuga. Treta Yuga is 12,96,000 years. 4 times Kali Yuga is Satya Yuga or Krita Yuga. 17,28,000 years. This itself is like that 2G, 1,76,000. Beyond that, how many zeros if you add, it doesn't make a difference. This is all these 4 yugas put together is one Mahayuga. So one Mahayuga is 43,20,000 years. 43,20,000 years is one Mahayuga. 1,000 Mahayuga is how much? 432 crores or 4.32 billion years. This is 1000 Mahayugas. This calculation is given in Gita. Again, go through chapter 8. Sahasra Yuga Paryantam Ahorat. He says, one who know this, they know the night and day. Ahoratri Vido Janaha, he says. 1000 Mahayugas, which is 432 crore years. 432 crore solar, our earthly years, is one day of Lord Brahma. It is one day of Lord Brahma. Lord Brahma, meaning one day also means what? It's 12 hours. Where is day means day. day is not that word. So therefore, equivalent of that is Brahma's night also. So this is one day. So here itself our imagination goes. That is why I said those who are adept in mathematics can come closer to Vedanta, because mathematics is a phenomenal subject that invokes our thinking, imagination, where actual physical reality cannot go. We gave this example of folding the paper. If you fold the paper 32 times, how much thick it will be? It will go in kilometers, but it will not fold. In reality, a paper will not fold more than 5-6 times. A4 paper you try, it will not fold. But mathematics can make us imagine how long it could be and how small the thickness could be. It is unimaginable. But that calculation you can make if you know maths. Similarly, maybe 1000 times more than that is what these Vedantic scriptures are asking us to take our thought there to imagine what that great thing is. It is left for your imagination, as it were, but you can imagine only when your mind is available for imagination, isn't it? Mathematics also you can do only when your thinking power is available. The thinking power is made available only when the mind is calm. And in that calm mind, when you read this, these are staggering phenomena for us. So one day of Lord Brahma, when I say one day, the 24-hour day, is 8.64 billion earthly years. That is one day of Lord Brahma. One day of Lord Brahma multiplied by 30 is 1 month of Lord Brahma. Multiplied by 12 is 1 year of Lord Brahma. Multiply that by 100 is 100 years of Lord Brahma. That is the age of Lord Brahma. What is the present age of present Brahma? It is said, again, whatever is said, I am saying, it is said to be 51. When we do Sankalpa, we say Adya Brahmanaha, Dvitiya Pararte, and the Kalpa and other things comes. It's a very interesting thing. There's 1000 Mahayugas. It is divided into Manvantras. There are 14 Manus. So if you calculate 71 into 14, it comes to 994. So each Manu rules for 71 Mahayuga time. And in between two Manu, there is an interim period of 1 Kalpa. So 994 plus 6 becomes 1000. Like that is a calculation. This present Manu is called Vaivasvata Manu. That is why in the Gita it says Vivasvan Manave Praha Manu Rikshvakare Abravit. So we are in the present rule of Vaivasvata Manu. And this Kalpa is called as Shvetavaraha Kalpa. Kalpa means one day of Brahma. This day is called Kalpa and night is called as, what is it called? Pralaya. I think Pralaya. Kalpa and Pralaya is the term that is given. So, Kalpa is the day of Brahma. So, the present Brahma is supposed to be in the 51st year. This is the calculation that is given. So, Adya Brahmanaha Dvitiya Pararte. Dvitiya Pararte means second half. First half of 50 years is over. Dvitiya Pararte. Shvetavara Kalpe, etc. The mantras that come, it is talking about this. So, Parantakale means, Antakale means end of time. Parantakale means very end of time. Very end of time is when Brahma completes his life. Brahma completes his life. Parantakale. That means end of Brahma, end of Brahmaloka, end of everything as it were. It's called as complete dissolution. Adyanta Pralaya. That means absolute dissolution. This Pralaya itself is classified or differentiated or rather understood in 4 different ways. One is called as Nitya Pralaya. Pralaya means what? Laya means what? As I said, Laya means you go and dissolve into something. That's called as Laya. Even as a person is listening to a music and the audience gets completely into the singer's mood and into the song, he has become Laya with it, they say. Laya means it's complete merger with it. That's why in this, the outer eyes and other sense organs is called Go Laya. Go Laya means the earth, as it were, comes and merges into it. It's Laya. It is merging into it. Pralaya means complete dissolution. Pra always is a additional prefix in the Sanskrit language. Pralaya. So Nitya Pralaya means that you dissolve on a daily basis. What is that? Sleep. Sleep is Pralaya as far as you are concerned. As far as you are concerned, you don't experience this world when you are in deep sleep. That is also one way of saying that it is Pralaya. You can extend it to understand that on a daily basis, many beings are dead also. For them, this world is again gone because death is an extended sleep. If you want to extend it from individual point of view, this is Nitya Pralaya. Nitya Pralaya is where on a daily basis the dissolution happens. Then there is something called as Naimittika Pralaya. Naimittika Pralaya means on the basis of certain nimitta. Nimitta means based on certain incident or a cause. That cause is Brahma's sleep. That is at the end of his one day. At the end of his one day, some Pralaya happens, and what goes into dissolution is these 3 lokas. What are these 3 lokas? Bhuhu, Bhuvaha and Suvaha. There are said to be 7 lokas. Because that's why I said this time and space are interrelated concept. When you come to that space, we are again, our mind blows when they say as to what this lokas and what their distances and calculations are. There are said to be 7 lokas. 7 lokas above, 7 lokas below, 14 lokas. Again, 14 lokas are given. These 3 are taken as Mahavyakritis. Bhur, Bhuva, Swaha. Philosophically, they are interpreted as even waking, dream, deep sleep also you can say it. Nothing wrong with it. Right, it is also right. But in the terms that is given on the other side, it is also the 3 lokas which are in the realm of Surya Mandala or where the sun is there. That is why beyond this in the netherworld he says Asurya Loka. There is a place where the sun's rays doesn't enter. That is a different loka. These are lokas as it were the sun is ruling. Starting from this world up to Suvaha means Swargaloka, which is the normal heaven where Indra and all are said to reside, etc. These 3 go into dissolution when Brahma goes to sleep, and these 3 come back when the Brahma wakes up. This is a interim dissolution that happens with reference to this phenomenal universe. Again, I am not going into science. If you calculate again the ice age and this age and that age where no creatures are there, and when they come up again, probably it will fit into this calculation of years. And then comes Adyanta Pralaya. Adyanta Pralaya is the ultimate Pralaya where Brahma's 100 years is over. At that time, including Brahma is said to be the first creation. So when the last dissolution goes, he is the last person to go. When he goes, there is nothing else as it were. Meaning any manifestation, it is not there for us to imagine. In that sense, all the lokas beyond Suvaha is Maharloka, Janaloka, Tapoloka, Satyaloka. Satyaloka is Brahmaloka. These 7 lokas above and all the other things which are part of this, whatever you can imagine, everything goes into dissolution. So in that sense, the entire thing goes into unmanifestation. And then what happens? Then after such and such period, equal period, again the manifestation begins, starting from Brahma as it were. All this you have to understand at Tattva level also. All this you have to imagine at the figurative level also. It's very phenomenal. It's all Tattva basically. That is the third pralaya, and that is the Parantakala that is being mentioned in this verse. At the end of time, when that dissolution happens, there is no concept of space and time, because when Nitya Pralaya happens, there is no space or time as far as you are concerned. But you cannot say that you have dissolved everything and there is no space outside you. Your hand also get hurts when you are asleep. When morning the blood comes, how can you say it was not there? It was all there, right? But as far as you are concerned, as when you are going through the deep sleep, that is not there. But it is the phenomenon is there. Similarly, you can imagine that the second level, that is still there at the higher levels. All the creation is there. At this level, there is absolutely no creation. There is a complete dissolution that happens. But what causes the phenomenon to come back again? Again, it is given as the power of Maya, etc. That everything is going back into unmanifest. Just as you go from manifestation to unmanifestation, from unmanifestation you come back to manifestation. This is a natural cycle. This is again given in 8th chapter very clearly. With this verse, also read the 8th chapter of Gita. Very many parallel concepts come there. 8th chapter is very subtle in terms of this particular idea. So just as the manifestation happens, unmanifestation also happens. This is at the individual level said in the 27th mantra verse of Gita, chapter 2. Jatasya hi dhruvam mrityuhu dhruvam janma mritasya cha. That which will be dead will be born again. That which will be born will be dead again. This is a natural phenomenon. If this natural phenomenon could be understood at individual level, microcosmic level, you can project it to macrocosmic level and you can project it to the ultimate thing. This cycle phenomenon continues. This phenomenon continues because of the power of Maya, as it were. And this power of Maya is not different from what is the power wielded by the Supreme Lord. So, the Supreme Lord is beyond all these things. There is another pralaya apart from these three. I forgot its name. That is called as whatever it is. This is the real pralaya. That is the state of self-realization where Maya is also conquered. Maya is conquered. There is no further manifestation or anything at all. That is called as ultimate. Whatever. There is no words to describe it. In terms of phenomenon, it is given like this. So therefore, what is the concept that is given here is Te Brahmalokeshu. So there are three paths that are distinctly given in the Shastras. One is called as the path of return. Another is called as the path of no return. Another is not a path, a misnomer. It's not a path as it were. It is getting into realization here and now. The path of return is indicated as Dakshinayana in Gita. Dakshinayana is not to be understood as just the 6 months of our winter solstice here. It is not. It's a symbolic and a figurative meaning there. It's a path of return which is to do with darkness, smoke, etc. All these things are given. And then there is a path of no return where it is a path of light, where there is a path of sun as it were. So path of moon and path of sun it is given. But third one is not a path. A path is a term used, but it is a, like he says, pravishanti sarve, somebody enters. Enters means he doesn't enter from one thing to another. That realization of the Kaivalya happens here and now. So that these three paths are called as, first path is called as Swargaloka path. Swargaloka is up to the realm of Swarga, you go and come back. And this Swarga can be any Swarga. Various realms are there. Up to Brahmaloka also it is Swarga only. Meaning realms of heaven. Each and every realm of heaven, philosophically we have to understand, and which we will take it up in the next class, is each and everything is a phenomenal realm where you enjoy it more and more. That is why it's called as heaven. Similarly, all the hell that is given below is the realm where you are agitated more and more. So the seventh or the lowest hell is the toughest sort of to go through. Highest form of enjoyment is the Brahmaloka, which is the highest. In the 8th chapter, again a verse says, Abrahma Bhuvana Loka Punaravartinorjuna. I leave it with this thought because, as I said, this is a very subtle concept. Just gulp it for now. I mean, you have to think a lot about it. A Brahma Bhuvana Loka Punaravartino Arjuna. Up to Brahma Loka, O Arjuna, Punaravartino Arjuna. That means you are supposed to only come back. A Brahma Bhuvana Loka. Up to Brahma Loka, you only come back. Here what is given is Te Brahma Lokeshu Paranta Kale Paramrutat Parimuchanti Sarve. From Brahma Loka, you don't come back. You are liberated. So the three concepts are path of no return is not liberation. It is a path by which you gain some merits and you come back. Path of no return is where you enjoy certain merits but you don't come back. You go to realization from there. That is through Brahmaloka. It is called as Krama Mukti. Mukti is there. Liberation is there. But it is in stages. And then third is Kaivalya Mukti or Sadhyo Mukti, which is achievable here and now. Here and now means while living here in this mortal world. So it is Kaivalya means direct liberation. There is no going somewhere and then going and then all these things are not there. It is achievable here and now. It sounds very easy, the third one, but third is the toughest, obviously. It is here and now you can achieve. In okay, tomorrow you'll meditate, and it's not so easy, but it is there. It is possible. These are the three concepts that you need to understand here. So what you need to think about is, when do we come back? What is the condition for that? I'll give you a clue. I said Jnanam and Karma are incompatible. So what do you achieve with Jnana? What do you achieve with Karma? Second point, what is the above lokas, above Swargaloka? When do you go to up to Swargaloka? When do you go beyond up to the Swargaloka? Third is, when the exhaustion of the effects of the third term that I am using here is Upasana. When the effects of that goes away, what happens to that Jiva? In other words, when does that liberation happen is, we said that when Brahma himself goes away, then after so many years, again the creation and everything starts from ABCD. At that time, this individual doesn't come back. At that time, he doesn't come back. So this is called as Krama Mukti. In this mantra, he is talking about Krama Mukti. We'll conclude with that. Yes, sir.
But does it mean in Brahmaloka, you can get liberation in stages? But what about the three karmas, Sanchita karma and Arame karmas?
See, this Agami Sanchita karma, I'm not saying that it is divorced from what we are saying here. But this is when you are understanding this concept as it is, stick to this concept. And then we can reconcile with this other concept. With reference to liberation, it is correct that only when your Sanchita karma are enough over that you are going to get liberated. But the path that a person takes, does he do only desire-ridden activities? Does he do desire-ridden activities along with certain worship, certain phenomena of internal worships? Does he do only meditation here with a single pointed focus? Then who is eligible to do it? What is the phenomenon of doing selfish, unselfish and unselfless activities while in this world itself? So that is why when he talked about getting liberation, he says Shraddha Bhakti Dhyana Yoga Davehi Na Karmana. We said that karma obviously is not talking about selfish karma here. There's no question about that discussion at all. So when karma cannot get you liberation, up to what level can karma get? So beyond that lokas to go, what you must do beyond karma also is there. That beyond karma, what you do, is it enough for direct liberation here, or does it take you through stages somewhere? This is the phenomenon that is being explained. So you just, as I said, sort of absorb this concept as it is. Then we have to understand the phenomenon of time and space, how it fits into this. Then probably this concept will be clear. This is a concept of a great intellectual interest and a great Vedantic concept, and he is not talking something as an imagination. It is there as a concept also. It is said, I'll leave with this one thought for you to think about. In this, beyond all this, there's supposed to be one pole star above, which we worship as Dhruva. Dhruva in Sanskrit means fixed. That is why the Dhruva star is somebody who can guide the navigators and others also. It's called Dhruva. Dhruva means it's fixed. In Sanskrit it means fixed. But in Puranic story wise, Dhruva is the mandala where Dhruva goes and sits. As you know, Dhruva worshipped Lord Vishnu. Vishnu appeared, and these are all the stories. At the end of it all, he did not ask for immediate liberation. And he is regretting after that why he did not ask. So Dhruva goes through actually this Krama Mukti is the story. That story, and therefore the Dhruva is not that he is sitting there, obviously he is in great enjoyment. How is that great enjoyment is? Around the Dhruva star is the Saptarishi Mandal. So it is always that he is in the company of the Saptarishis. Because when we talk about Swargaloka and enjoyment, maximum we have always thought about is there is a earthly enjoyment and you multiply it 10 times, 100 times, 1000 times. All that we can maximum conceive is enjoyment with reference to sensual enjoyment only. All the enjoyment that we get, you can say that a beautiful picture you saw or a emotional relationship with a great person you had, 10 times that, 100 times that, 1000 times that, you can leave it to imagination. But when in enjoyment, we don't think in terms of or argue in terms of the enjoyment of a satsang, enjoyment of study of scriptures, enjoyment of a person when he is immersed in bhakti in a temple, enjoyment of various other things like this. Imagine that type of enjoyment here and multiply that by 10 times, 100 times. It is unimaginable. It is unimaginable actually. A person who is going in through Brahmaloka and Swargaloka, they are having two different kinds of enjoyment as it were. So therefore, when Dhruva is sitting there, he is always in a permanent state of bliss only. He is in a permanent state of bliss only. And that bliss cannot be compared with any bliss that we can think of. So that type of a bliss multiplied by whatever 1000 times, 10,000 times, etc. is this concept of Krama Mukti. So that Dhruva will be always there witnessing everything here. Even as the Naimittika Pralaya happens and everything in the world goes and comes, those in the higher lokas are able to witness this is the phenomenon that is given. But what is it philosophically? We'll see in the next class. And just one announcement before we conclude. Yes, sir.
So here if we consider that Sankhya type of philosophy with the Panchikarana aspect, that there is a Prakriti and there is a Purusha. And in the beginning that Prakriti got all these the Sattva, Rajas and Tamas in equilibrium. Then a disturbing force comes, it disturbs all these things, and then the entire creation and everything starts. Now the question is, where is this Shuddha Sattva there at that time?
Shuddha Sattva is referring to Brahman only, nothing else. So, if you consider Prakriti as an inherent Tattva within the Brahman, see that is why this in this Panchikarana example or in the Panchikarana concept, the combination happens and only then the elements become impure. Elements in their pure form, it is there as it is. That elements in their pure form have no what you call as a staining quality. See, in the phenomenon of Lord Vishnu reclining in the Adishesh Naga is when the 5 hoods of Adishesha are turned towards him. That means in the total dissolution state, the Prakriti Tattva is absorbed into the Supreme Brahman as it were. So the 5 elements which is representing that, it is in a completely withdrawn state. The manifestation and all other things with reference to Sattva, Rajas, Tamas in manifestation comes only after creation. So there's no discussion of gunas in the state of pure dissolution. Just as in our phenomenon we can say the state of deep sleep has no gunas as it were. You can say it is pure tamas, but pure tamas is like pure sattva. It really doesn't. So we say sattva, rajas, tamas are in mental textures. So when mind itself is not there, where's the question of texture? It doesn't occur. We'll conclude with the bhajans here.
Mukunda
गोपाला गिरिधारी गिरिधारी जय राधे गोपाला घनश्याम श्याम श्याम जय जय राधे गोपाला घनश्याम श्याम श्याम जय जय राधे गोपाला जय नंद मुकुंदा नंद गोविंदा राधे गोपाला जय नंद मुकुंदा नंद गोविंदा राधे गोपाला गोविंदा माधवा गोपाला केशवा गोविंदा माधवा गोपाला केशवा गोपाला केशवा गोपाला केशवा
पूर्णमदः पूर्णमिदं पूर्णात् पूर्णमुदच्यते पूर्णस्य पूर्णमादाय पूर्णमेवावशिष्यते ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः